Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Earl said, my name is Greg Kochansky. I'm the Vice President of Thought Leadership and Applied AI at the AAA, where I co-run the AAA ICDR Institute, which is the AAA's internal think tank. Today, we published the results of a wide-ranging survey on AI governance practices across industries and functional roles. We'll get more into the methodology in a moment. First, though, I'm joined by our panelists for today, who are my colleagues, Diana Didia and Sasha Carbone. As we talk through the results of the survey, they're going to share their thoughts on AI governance from their respective technology and legal points of view. Diana is Executive Vice President, Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at the AAA. And in that role, she has a full view on how our AI systems are evaluated, built, tested, governed, and operationalized. We have a number of AI systems currently in production. Public ones include Clause Builder AI and the AI Arbitrator that we launched at the end of last year. Sasha is Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Assistant Corporate Secretary at the AAA. She oversees legal, AI governance, corporate governance, inclusion, and enterprise risk management. And she has published writing about closing the AI governance gap, which is our core theme for today's program. Before we get into it, a quick note about survey methodology. We partnered with the firm iResearch Services to conduct a quantitative and qualitative survey. We collected online responses from 500 senior leaders at large organizations across industries. And we supplemented these results with a series of in-depth interviews that add commentary to contextualize our findings. After this webinar, audience members will be emailed a link to download the survey, but we're going to preview some of the key findings here. So the top line insight is that respondents see a significant implementation gap. Many organizations have devised general principles for how they intend to govern AI use, but most are less than confident that they are actually living those principles on a day-to-day basis. Now, all three of us serve on the AAA's AI Governance Committee, and in fact, the two of you have been leading those efforts. And nearly a year in, I think we've all seen how AI governance is an ongoing practice and not some one-off set it and forget it project. Sasha, what do you see in this gap between having governance principles and having governance that actually works in practice?
Thank you, Greg. So I think the first step in closing the gap is a structural one. As we learned and confirmed through this study, policies that just exist on paper are fragile and ultimately unsustainable. To be effective, governance must act as an operating system. It's one that is risk-based, it's continuous, and it's embedded across the AI lifecycle. And the issue is usually not that organizations lack awareness of what makes effective AI governance. The report shows that organizations are aware that cross-collaboration, dedicated governance roles, risk-based processes are all important in having a sustainable AI governance program. It's just that organizations have found it hard to move past sort of the documentation, the policy, and really truly making it an embedded AI governance lifecycle. I think that's part of what explains the gap is that the frameworks have not been turned into that continuous sort of loop that you need. And then also, I think that cross collaboration is easier said than done because it really does require strong relationship among the business units with technology, with legal, and others to really make AI governance happen. And since I have Diana on the line too today, that CTO and GC relationship is particularly important to drive that cross collaboration. And I think that's one of the key drivers to having strong AI governance. And just a note on sort of legal's role. So legal's role is not to slow down innovation or to put up roadblocks along the process. It really is to take that legal view, which has a view toward regulation or the lack of regulation and how that's going to be filled. And making sure that sort of the accountability that we want to see in these processes are there and that we have operational guidelines built in before the key decisions are locked in.
Thank you, Sasha. And Diana, when you see in the bottom bar here, 56% with good structures, but inconsistent execution, what do you think consistent execution looks like from the technology side?
Yeah, hi. Happy to be here. Yeah, I think developing the policies is just the first step. I think the harder part is really operationalizing those policies. And by that, I mean, baking the governance into the design and technical requirements of what you're building. And also mapping out processes and accountability for things like monitoring the AI, measuring its accuracy, and if the AI is misbehaving in some way, what is the process for addressing, escalating that, and addressing and remediating that. And it takes time to map all that out and identify the people that should be accountable and train them on the procedures and processes and expectations. Just coming back to the design and governance, it's hard. You have to, technology teams are moving very quickly on all of this. The governance program has to keep up. Otherwise, the technology teams are just going to build and route around the governance, which also contributes to your inconsistency. But again, the collaboration with the other members, especially with legal, on defining the policies and the principles by which you want the technology to adhere to. And then coming back to that, how do you bake that in? Looking at things like the LLMs, you have to understand the particular risks and discuss what guardrails you want baked into the technology, whether that's a human in the loop, discussions around the constrained data set that you're going to use. Are there any biases in that data set? There's lots of decisions to be made around the LLMs themselves that get relate to the governance, but also even the design of the application. I mean, you talk about things like transparency and explainability, and a lot of that is driven by the screens themselves. And when you pause to read something out or provide citations or what have you, and all of that doesn't get done well if it isn't discussed under the governance umbrella. You're not going to meet, again, your governance mandate unless those things are discussed early on in the process of an actual project, planning and execution.
Thank you, Sasha and Diana. And I think you both touched on some themes that we're going to drill down on later on the presentation around collaboration, just how fast things are moving, and the need to have various kinds of feedback loops so that learnings on the technical side are informing governance processes. So another feature of the AAA's AI governance journey is that it's been a true cross-functional effort, from our CEO to our legal, technology, innovation, and operations teams. All of them have had a hand in building out a robust structure and then actually managing the day-to-day governance process. Now, the survey results show that while this might be best practice, and I believe that it is, collaboration, I think, is essential, it's maybe not such a common practice. And these results for me also beg the question, who should be accountable for AI governance? Sasha, how should leaders think about an AI governance committee as a way to address specifically CEO level accountability without expecting the CEO to personally approve every single AI governance decision?
Yeah, I think the question of the CEO's involvement is important because the CEO really sets the tone in terms of the organization's approach to AI governance, its use across the organization. And so typically it would be the CEO and the board of directors that sets expectations with respect to risk appetite for AI AI and AI governance. And this is like every other enterprise risk that an organization is assessing. The CEO is working with the board to determine what the risk appetite for the organization is. And so I think that is a step that has to be taken. And then the AI governance committee then helps convert those risk appetites to an operating structure. So the CEO remains accountable for the enterprise risk posture, but the committee really sets the controls, applies the expertise, while keeping the CEO informed of any issues that fall outside of those parameters. And the committee's role, for that reason, is very important. It's not a symbolic position. And particularly as the organization's AI tools grow or the use of AI tools grow, this will be one of the most hardworking governance committees in your organization if they're doing it, if they're doing their job right. One of the things that we did as we were growing and building our AI governance is looking at each step of the way, ensuring that we had the right resources to bear. First, with respect to our AI governance committee, that we had both the staffing, the resources, and the right people in the room. So every organization is going to look different, but ours has representatives from legal, from tech, from business operations, compliance, to make sure that we are having those valuable contributions from different areas of expertise, because this is one area where it's needed. There's also organizations have enterprise risk management committees, separate committees, and those should not be siloed. Those should be a part of the AI governance process. And so you have to make sure there's a continuous loop of communication among the AI governance committee and the ERM committee. Looking at this slide, I would have to say I was surprised to some extent because of what we've been building at the AAA in terms of the partnership among legal and IT and executive leadership and all of these other functions. And I think that has really contributed to our success of getting our arms around how to build our AI governance process and systems.
Yes, and I also my sense, just given our journey over the past year, is that this committee is not a static thing. Over time, I think we've had conversations where we've said, "Oh, we should add this person or that person," or Sasha, you recently added a VP of AI governance to your team, and so obviously that's a person who would logically be added to this committee. But this is an area where you can evolve and learn and expand a committee as needed based on what you learn as you think through all of these processes and frameworks.
That's exactly right, Greg. And I would just add there too, another part of her title is integration. So it's AI governance and integration, which reflects that life cycle perspective that we have, that she's not just sort of at one piece of the process, but she is continuously interacting with folks across the organization to make sure that the tools that we're building and that we're approving then get integrated properly. And we're looking at that life cycle and applying controls throughout.
Yes. And Diana, from the CTO's perspective, what does a governance committee need to understand about the technology so that it makes better decisions rather than just adding friction to the process? I mean, I think there's a balance there, right? You don't want to inundate people with really high detail technical jargon or anything like that, but they do have to have some sort of grounding, right?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I think there is some fluency that's required, just understanding model behavior and what is possible. But there's, a lot of very use case specific information that gets discussed. If there's third party dependencies, what are the cybersecurity risks? what are the legal risks, and having thoughtful conversations around the potential guardrails. When we were building our AI arbitrator, it was quite a complex undertaking, and we had, I mean, it's a legal use case, so we had the benefit of having legal in the room helping us to define the requirements, from the get-go. But at some point, I actually took the time to write up a very detailed technical FAQ that's only for internal consumption, that really went documented, how we were using the LLMs, in how we were measuring, what data was being used, which models were being used. And we return to that quite a bit when we're talking about the agents and if we're making changes to any part of the AI brain that's running the AI arbitrator. And I felt that was important, to really just get it on paper, and then, they could read through that almost like a primer, and we could have an exchange of making sure that we're level setting on technology. So again, they can't opine on risks that they don't fully understand, and so I think that back and forth is really important. I would also say that, we're talking about what we share with the governance committee or what they need to know, but also, because when you're building all of these systems, there's a lot going on. We have a very large team that's executing on all of this. We've had to do a lot of ensuring that the technology team understands the governance program, and what they're accountable for is raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm making a change here, and I think that it has additional risk. And, that needs to come out back through the chain, and we need to bring that back to the committee. So there was also not just educating the committee on, what the technology does, but the people that are building this, giving them fluency in what governance programs are all about, why the risk mitigations are important, so that they have that lens on what they're building and they proactively raise their hand. Because things are just, there's a lot of things in flight and a lot of things happening, and it is like a big feedback loop, and certainly not one and done. So that reverse education is just as important.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also remember that AI governance is just one component of building and deploying AI systems at a large organization. And, the AI governance committee does not operate in a silo. Ours does not. It's constantly in conversation with other committees, whether that's, enterprise risk management or strategy or privacy. We even have a separate AI enablement committee that is looking more at the use cases that we need rather than specifically how to put guardrails around them, although, of course, they consider that as well. And so it's a whole ecosystem that's built around, deploying AI systems. And, this is an important part of it, but it has to be in conversation with others.
Yeah, and Greg, just to your point about that collaboration, one good example is our use of risk assessments. So we do two risk assessments for every use case. One is at the inception to determine, what the level of risk is, and if it's even something we want to proceed with developing or proceed with determining whether it's a good use case for our organization. And that is done with the AI governance committee, but in collaboration with the business owners. And so it is a process of communicating, making sure that we understand fully what the tool does, what the risks are, and then rating them not just at the inception, but then doing a fuller, more extensive risk assessment that shows the residual risk after any mitigations are applied. And again, being done in collaboration with your tech team and with the business owners. And so, to your point, none of this operates in a vacuum. It can't. The lines are blurred in terms of who you're working with. And it doesn't matter that someone on Diana's team, reports to her. I think everyone has a sense of shared responsibility when it comes to AI governance, and I think that's the kind of culture you want to create when you're using and building AI tools. Whether you're a small organization or a large organization, you have to have that feedback loop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and culture is, I'm sorry, Diana, you go right ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was just going to add about the initial risk assessment, and I think Sasha mentioned early on that this process is not meant to be a blocker. And again, we have objectives. We need to make sure we're risk mitigating, but we also want to reduce friction where we can reduce friction. And I think that having that early risk assessment, it sets us down a path. Whether or not we really need to dig in and have a lot more conversations about governance, or if we think something is really low risk and the team can get going. Not that we don't need to do that final assessment. So I think that two-step risk assessment is a way it contributes to the agility of the program as well.
Mhm. And Sasha, you mentioned the word culture, which was a word that came into my mind while you were talking as well. And that is kind of an important background consideration here. And the AAA, I think, has a very, by its nature, a very collaborative and consensus-driven culture. And perhaps that's made it easier for us to build these systems because they do have to communicate across so many functions and across so many committees. And we've built that muscle. And it's something I think for organizations to consider that, to think about those cultural considerations and making sure that collaboration is, an important foregrounded consideration in terms of governing AI.
Hmm.
So some might see tension between the notion of accountability and the need to share responsibility for such a complex and multifaceted process. But the survey shows that a large majority of respondents believe that collaboration is an extremely important feature of an effective AI governance program. Sasha, what does genuine collaboration look like from the legal side, especially when legal may not own the technology, but may own or at least share accountability for legal and regulatory exposure?
Right. So, true collaboration requires that each function brings their expertise to the table, and there's not one voice that has precedent over another. And I think that's difficult when you're talking about technology because the tech teams are the ones by their nature that have the most information. So part of it is culturally understanding the point of having AI governance, which is that just because you can do something doesn't mean it's a good idea. And we have folks from different disciplines in the organization that can, bring to bear on that question, whether this is something that fits within our organization's mission, our organization's strategic goals. Does this adhere to our principles as an organization? So I think coming from it from that perspective makes a lot of sense. That of course there's not going to be one discipline that is going to take precedence over another, but that's having that respect to know that everyone should have a say before decisions are made. And so this is just something that you need to be vigilant about. Just like the lawyers on the team, we know the most about the regulations and what to look out for. We all have sort of our own areas where we add to the process. But yeah, there is that danger, and you just have to be vigilant and watching it so that your governance is not just governance on paper, that you actually are taking into consideration all of the risk factors, all of the principles that got you to the place where you are. And we'll talk a little bit about how you build those principles, for your organization. But I think that's the foundation. And I think that's where there's a shared sense of what is our goal here. It's not merely to build, it's not merely to have all of these use cases. It's fulfilling a purpose. And I think defining what that purpose is really important at the outset.
Mhm.
Mhm. And Diana, what does genuine collaboration look like from the technology side? And I know you spoke to this a bit on one of the previous slides, but how do you avoid a dynamic where the technology side feels governed by people who might not have full context on all of the considerations that go into building these systems?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that it's worth pointing out that I know we keep saying you don't want things to be a blocker, but I really do feel like when we started getting more formal about our governance, we were jumping into that right from the get-go, the need for it and the need for it to evolve into something more formal. But it really enabled, like, a lot of these use cases, you are stepping into areas that have potential risk for your organization, and if you don't have a program that allows the assessment of those risks and decisions to be made yes or no, you kind of get stuck, right? Which is actually very frustrating for the technology team because maybe we see, how, the potential return on investment for the business or, cost savings, time savings, what have you, if we were to execute and implement something and we can't get off of the first step because we're talking about risk at 100,000 feet and not getting into how that risk can be mitigated step by step. So I really think that I embrace the program as something that allows me to move at pace, and to really execute on good ideas. Yeah, I think also the back and forth, for us, we were quite lucky because we're building legal use cases, and so we actually require the subject matter expertise of legal people to do what we're doing well. So Sasha's team has actually wore a lot of hats. Like she's got a governance hat on one day, and she mentioned that our vice president of governance has that integration title, and we're really using the legal team to sit with us. And when we're writing prompts for an LLM, it needs to be talking like a lawyer, and we need them to give us the appropriate legal terminology. And so that's been really effective for us. This almost like co-programming, if you will, between us and subject matter experts. And I know in our environment that was happened to be also legal, but that this first bullet here talks about between legal, technical, and business teams. And I think if in other domain areas, whatever the business SMEs would be, I think really, having the door wide open between the business cubicles and the programmers cubicles, and inviting them into while you're making, the cake, if you will, having them opine on the prompts, on the outputs. I feel like that's how we're going to develop the best product. And in that sense, again, it's all contributing to governance because you're ensuring the most accurate outcomes. I really feel maybe another aspect of this is that we, a mandate from the top that we are going to innovate, that this is a time when there's so much potential in all of this technology. And therefore, I think this mindset of we're really trying to make it happen. We're really going after it. We really want to make this use case practical for us to implement. And if people go into it with that mindset, then it really is in service of a goal. Like we may, constrain what we're trying to do if we think there's too many risks, but I think it starts with that of that we're not trying to stop it, we're trying to enable it.
Mm. One last observation on this slide before we move on. We're focused here on a governance gap, that there's something lacking in implementation. But I think a lot of the themes reflected in these responses we've covered, things like culture and accountability and decision authority. And all the respondents, or a great majority of them, intuited that these are the sort of ingredients in the AI governance recipe if you're going to do it right. And then one of the lower scoring items was adequate resources. This is not seen as a resource issue where we just don't have what we need to do what we need to do. And so I think that shows a lot of potential here for organizations that might feel like they're a little behind to catch up. One thing that we gave a great deal of thought to was the full scope of the AI governance lifecycle. When you deploy an AI tool, that's only the beginning. There's still a need to monitor usage and outputs in production, among other things. But the survey results suggest that governance typically falls off after these systems are built, even before they're deployed. And this was to me one of the most surprising insights because we found that deploying, monitoring, and even decommissioning are quite time and thought intensive activities, and building the structures to be able to do that in an appropriate manner, it takes effort. Diana, why is lifecycle governance so important from a technology perspective?
Yeah, this slide is interesting to me because before you deploy something, it's all in you have 100% control over it, right? So if it's not behaving well, you just don't put it in production. But after you have it running and you have users, in our case, we have AI arbitrator, if you have cases going through there, like this any technology can have performance or reliability issues, right? And now you throw in the LLMs that even after best tuning, you're ultimately calling a model that's controlled by a third party, right? And they may, it can drift away from its accuracy. We're these companies, there's a lot of money going into them, but that doesn't mean that a human can't make a mistake, right? Maybe a model is deployed early before it's ready on that end. You want to see signals from your own software as to how the thing is performing. And then, if it is underperforming in a way that is, in a potential, very significant risk zone, you need a way to immediately escalate that and act on that. And then even if you're not so worried about, or the signals aren't necessarily telling you have to take immediate action, we're doing a lot of tuning back to legal use cases. The legal landscape is very complex, and we may see that it's not performing as well as it would like in certain corner cases. And we want to see those signals and act on that from a continuous improvement perspective. And so, in our AI arbitrator, we have built in a lot of places where the humans in the loop, who are both the filers and a human arbitrator who validates the AI outputs of the AI arbitrator, there's places where they can make edits and do thumbs up and thumbs down. And all of those signals come back to us in an observability platform where we can see what's going on and again take action, and again maybe in service of risk mitigation, but also most importantly in service of continuous improvement.
Mhm. And Sasha, how does this issue of life cycle governance connect to legal accountability and risk management?
Yeah, so when you're talking about governance, and you also have to talk about evidence in terms of how you are testing, how you're documenting the testing, and so and this comes into play if there's an auditor, if there's government decisions for regulations. Um, I think the idea of proving you have AI governance in place is one that you have to think hard about, because you could have all of the processes on paper, but if you can't show that your tool does what you said it does, then you can run into some trouble. And so what this translates into, for example, is a risk registry. So having all of the AI that's in use across your organization, and your evidence library in terms of the evidence that you have, that you are meeting certain controls that you have in place. That I think is critical for any organization that is building AI tools. I also want to say that in terms of the AI governance lifecycle, it not only applies to tools that you're building, but also tools that you are using. There are various use cases. If you're relying on third-party tools for your use cases, then you have to make sure that you have a process that it accounts for any changes in the underlying model, changes in the terms and conditions, for example. So, this, as illustrated, shows sort of the process for, large scale tools, but it also can apply to smaller tools. And I think it's something that people often miss. That just because you deployed a product or a third party tool and you vetted it at the beginning, that's, then you're done with it. You're not. That's just sort of the start. You have to make sure that throughout the life cycle of the use, that it still is meeting the needs of your organization, and that you're still monitoring any changes.
Thanks, Sasha. And I think that the obviously this 4% for retirement or decommissioning, that AI governance oversight is not being applied at the end of life of some sort of AI system is perhaps not surprising, because people are still just focused on building the things. But it really is an important consideration because if something does go off the rails, then you have to have a process in place to pull it back. Or technology may evolve and change in ways, and you may find better ways to accomplish the goal that you're trying to deploy the AI system to move forward. And so, there's really a need to think through the whole scope of the life cycle, and people are really falling short of that, it seems, at least based on our survey results. So this is a somewhat provocative theme, and we talked about that specifically when we were talking about what we were going to discuss today. But building the plane in the air might seem like a less than ideal approach to something as important as AI governance. But the technology has moved and continues to move so very fast. And our engineers are learning new things and applying new techniques as they build these systems, probably on a weekly basis. And those insights need to be taken into account from a governance standpoint. Also, standing up governance systems takes a lot of effort. I think that's something we've said a couple of times already. It took us the better part of a year and probably many hundreds of person hours, and I might be underestimating that. It's really not something that can be an afterthought. You have to start somewhere, and ideally very early. And this is a quote from one of our qualitative interviews, and I think the key word there is that this is an iterative process, and so you just have to start somewhere. Also, standing up uh, the survey results tend to show that AI governance actually has been an afterthought for many organizations, even though we're saying that it shouldn't be. And they have been focused on building, but they are still figuring out how to govern what they have built. The slide we have up here lists the AAA's own high-level principles for building responsibly with AI. And these are published on our website and have been for quite some time. And we'll share a link at the end of this session so that you can look at them in a bit more depth. They have some glosses on them and some other more verbose documents that dig into the details. But anyway, this was our starting point roughly a year ago, and it fits on a single slide. And what we have now is much more robust: flowcharts, policy documents, questionnaires, an inventory of AI use cases, full-time staff devoted to managing the process, and much more than that. And a question for both of you, and perhaps a somewhat rhetorical one: can you even imagine what it would be like if we were sitting here today with AI systems, the ones that we have in production, and all of that governance planning still was in front of us?
I wouldn't be sleeping very well at night. I'll say that.
No, but I mean, the slide it just makes me smile because this is where we started, Greg. This is exactly, we were, in a room, several rooms, really thinking about what does this mean to us, building and using AI responsibly. As an organization with a mission in particular, it was important to us. So as you said, these seem fairly straightforward and simple, but we spent a lot of time on this and also what each of these elements meant. And I think the one that all of these are important, but one of the most important was the ethical and human-centered values. That these are human-driven processes, and we want to make sure that those are central to what we're building. So yeah, this was really, this is a good starting place from my perspective, is what are your principles and standards as an organization? Creating those and using that as your building blocks for your governance program, your framework, your policies. And I think that makes it a little bit easier to view it in that way, is that you're not creating, nor do you have to create your AI governance in one shot. It is you build on it, as one of the respondents said, you iterate on it, and you have to because technology is changing so quickly, and we're getting smarter as the AI is getting smarter. I think the AI is getting smarter faster than we are, but we need to catch up and we need to keep up, I should say. So yeah, I think this is a great place to start. And these flow through everything that we do with respect to AI governance.
And even beyond governance, these are also principles to the point we discussed earlier that there are many committees and functional roles in the organization that touch AI and what we build with it. This isn't
Mhm.
just about governance. This is just a mindset for how we think about things. So, for instance, the AI arbitrator has a human in the loop at many steps. And I don't think there was any point where we didn't think that was the appropriate starting point. And that gets right to the human-centered and ethical design principles here. And we refer to these principles, we refer back to them, I think, quite frequently to make sure that some decision we're making is in line with them. And so they're a good shorthand, and they're not, even though they were developed at the beginning of the process, they still have an important role to play, I think.
Hmm.
And then finally, we talked about this briefly, but there's documentation. And this was another strong signal in the survey results. There is low confidence, extremely low, across the board that organizations will be able to prove what controls they have in place and that they are actually working in practice. And so, a question for both of you. Can you talk a bit about the discipline that it takes to develop a detailed paper trail, real evidence of AI governance?
Yeah, I'll start. I think Sasha touched on, recording the risk assessments and all that. The work of the committee itself is a little easier to, you have to stay practiced at it. I think having a dedicated vice president of AI governance, it contributes to us adhering to ensuring that we're not skipping steps around all of that. And when we do make decisions, they are adequately documented. Personally, I think the harder part is now we talked about measuring things in flight and, how are you keeping track of, the actual behavior of the models, and then what evidence would you provide to an auditor? A member of our committee is actually the head of our cybersecurity program, and, that's a principle. So that's important that he's ensuring that we're building safe products. But also, cybersecurity frameworks are a really good parallel to this entire program. And, under that umbrella, we undergo a ton of audits and we have to provide evidence. And I think he has really contributed to ensuring that we are putting practices and discipline in place around how we would how we would record what we're doing and then prepare for an audit. And we've had very nuanced conversations down to things like, what we name files and taxonomies for files. And, and that requires, again, a lens on it and saying, hey, if we do get asked, you can't have these files all named something else. It has to be something that we could, easily understand what subset we're giving to an auditor and that they could track it. And so I think that there is a lot of discipline in it, but I feel like it also, if you're doing this well, again, I think it just adds operational grease. Things become easier. So if you see it through that lens, we're going to do work up front that actually then just helps us do our job faster. It's not just in service of a potential audit. It's in service of really just being more operationally efficient.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Diana, too. It helps us in the work that we do because this is a life cycle process. We're going back to see how the product or tool performed at any given time. What were the factors, and if there are changes, that auditing function assists us in the work that we do. So it's also in service of that. And because we have a full life cycle process that we apply to our AI.
Mhm. I'll also comment that there's a lot of uh, all the tools we're using to do all of this. It isn't just that the LLMs are new and we're trying to leverage those. It's how you monitor and how you track everything. There's a lot of new entrants, and so that's also a challenge here. I think the technology team really has to stay on top of that. Is when we're picking, again, an observability platform or agent orchestration tool or what have you, which makes this not an easy exercise.
Yes. And this isn't only for documentation, isn't only for the purpose of audits or responding to regulatory oversight, right? And how about the importance of establishing a feedback loop where the learnings that get documented inform how the governance apparatus and how the AI systems evolve over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly on point. I agree with that.
So at this point, we can open this up to audience questions, and I see there are a few of them in the Q&A chat. So I will just start progressing through these. And again, if we can't get to all of the questions, we will collect these and try to follow up after the session. A pretty simple question to start is how do you define in a simple way what AI governance is?
Sasha, you go for it.
Yes. And you could add to it, Diana. I mean, I think AI governance is the process and controls that you have over the use of AI tools and your building of AI tools throughout its life cycle. So they contain a few things. They contain sort of the principles that are going to guide your responsible use and development of AI. They include your framework that shows how you are going to go about evaluating, assessing AI throughout its life cycle. And then there are a few other components to it. Having an AI governance committee with a charter that sets forth and defines their responsibilities. So I intentionally defined it in a sort of a broad way because there are so many elements that make up how you manage, use, deploy AI responsibly, and all of those elements are a part of your AI governance.
We have a question, and perhaps Diana, this is a good one for you from David Evans. I am curious about AI agents you might be building for employees and clients. And can you describe anything in production and how they are identified and prioritized? Does the governance plan differ for agentic applications? And I'll just add a gloss on that makes me think of the architecture of the AI arbitrator, which, is an agentic framework, but I'll let you speak to the question.
Yeah, I think David's question is there are enterprise or enterprise level tools like our AI arbitrator that is a series of agents behind. So a lot of the governance we've been talking about is where central IT is building this big complex system, and there are agents there and agent orchestration and monitoring and what have you. But if I have to guess, I think David's talking more about like the decentralized business development of agents. And I think there's a lot of talk and energy around that because that's where you're going to gain day-to-day efficiencies. In our organization, we talk a lot about our shared services functions, and there are people in finance that want to write agents, and whether that's for dashboarding or doing analytics, and our marketing team wanting to use an agent to draft, say, some sort of thought leadership piece and then automatically post that to our social media accounts. And we kind of see the governance on that in twofold. Like if we're bringing in a new tool that enables the development of agents or vibe coding in any way, that we are expecting the AI governance committee to assess the tool itself. And then the use cases, we certainly we have been talking about. We actually hired another new role, a dedicated vibe coder that essentially is a junior programmer that's committed to making the rounds, if you will. And it would be partially his responsibility to say, hey, this use case seems more complicated and should go up to the or maybe more risky, up to the governance committee for approval. So I think we're still sort of ironing out, like, when do you have to bring a particular use case and have it go through a full risk assessment versus, hey, all I'm trying to do here within our four walls is have it act like an assistance for me and summarize up, maybe go through my email and determine which emails I should be responding to first. But we do see governance playing a role in assessing those various use cases and determining if we think they're okay to build and deploy. I don't know, Sasha, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think that's right. I think that the trick, though, is how do those tools flow through the AI governance committee? thinking about how you capture that. And that's one of the things that we, had lots of discussions about is, what is the flow from, someone wanting to use a tool to actually being able to do it? And how do you make sure that your organization is continues to be able to innovate without creating these barriers that make it difficult to have review and approval of these tools? So I think that's one of the reasons why having a centralized AI governance committee is important, because otherwise you could see a situation where someone's going directly to Diana to get approval, or someone is going directly to our CMO to get approval. And that's not the way it works in our organization. All of those requests come through the AI governance committee so that there can be that assessment so that we can then capture those uses on our AI registry. It actually sounds harder than it is. I think it makes our ability to manage this process so much easier by having this committee. And then, of course, they have, their spreadsheets, and they have, places where you go to sort of get this information. So you do have to organize it in some way that's also easy. But that's the way we've structured it, and I think it works very well.
So we talked a bit about classifying risks into buckets, and one question in the chat: what type of use cases are risky for the use of AI?
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question. I guess what I would say is, you need to think about a couple of things. You need to think about what kind of information the AI use case would need. So, is confidential information involved? Is it sensitive information? I think you also need to think about risk in terms of use, in terms of the platforms, whether your information is going to be shared, whether you care that it's going to be shared. So I think the risk here, it requires an evaluation of what you're using the tool for and whose information is needed, and how that information is being processed. So it's not an easy thing to sort of pinpoint and say this is inherently risky. I think you have to take it on a case by case basis. Diana, do you have anything to add to that? I know that was a lawyer response. So as a non-lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly anytime you're having a use case that involves what would be considered sensitive or confidential data for your organization, that it falls more in the higher risk, and just where you are, where accuracy is really important. So obviously we've built an AI arbitrator where we are offering determinations of a legal case, and that is just immediately a high risk use case, because we understand that arbitrations are binding, and that we need to ensure the highest possible level of accuracy for that use case. And that's not all. There are a lot of other use cases that are more administrative in nature, that the humans that are doing those cases today certainly are not perfect, and you're not after theoretical perfection when you're trying to replace that function with AI. And so, having a more thoughtful conversation about, what is expected from an accuracy perspective, and that may be deemed a lower risk use case, because it's already outperforming. Maybe out of the box, it's already outperforming what a human could do.
Right. And then here's I think a relatively straightforward question. Do you think the hard part is, perhaps the answer isn't so straightforward, but do you think the hard part is getting the right framework built, or getting people across the business to actually use it consistently?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely think it's getting people to use it consistently. I think that is, often the stumbling block when you have policies that you want to put in place, is whether you get the buy-in, whether people understand the importance. I think the developing a framework, that's something that I think is the easier lift. I think for us, it was a matter of making sure our whole teams had the tools to understand sort of AI. So we've done a lot of training, we've given people tools, we've let folks experiment in a safe way. And although that's not related directly to AI governance, what it's doing is it's informing and making our team members across the organization better informed on AI, which I think has helped us then to impart the importance of AI governance, and then having those team members from different groups being involved in our AI governance committee with a say and a voice. I think all of those elements contribute to having the framework being used consistently. But I agree with the question that at least if that was the direction of the question, that is the much harder part. Diana, do you
Yeah,
agree?
I'll just quickly add that I agree. That is the much harder part. And also, early on, I think one of the slides said that resources are not the problem, but I think that it's quickly going to become part of the problem. Not that the more that we are adopting all of this technology and the higher risk use cases you're building and the more use cases you're building, like having a team of people that really are ensuring the adherence to governance and doing all the monitoring and just operationalizing everything. I think we talk a lot about jobs going away. That AI is gonna replace certain functions, but the management of AI and the governance of AI, I see as new job titles and new teams and what have you. And I think that's worth trying to visualize within your own organizations, because I think to really keep up with it and keep the engine running, you're going to need some dedicated staff at some point.
We have a couple of minutes left before we reach the hour, so perhaps we can cover one more question. And this one covers one of the details that's in our the AI principles slide that we put out before, which is how would you define a transparent AI system?
No, for us, it was being very thoughtful about having the AI read out, like no black box, step by step. If we think of the AI arbitrator, it's ingesting documents. Here's the summary of every document. It is pulling claims and issues out of those. Here are what they are, and here's the citation that takes you to the exact spot where I found it. So, and we understood that was it wasn't like oh, this is a cool feature. We knew that is what was going to drive trust in what we've built and drive usage. So I think it was just natural that we would want to just keep stopping and explaining. And I think that is really how, I think it's a natural progression of ensuring that you're meeting those transparency and explainability principles.
Mhm. And it's almost that governance is, about showing documentation and there's transparency at that level, but you also need the transparency of the AI showing its work in order to, appropriately manage the governance side of things. So we've reached the hour, and I want to thank our panelists, Diana and Sasha, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. And if there were questions that we weren't able to get to due to the time constraints, we will certainly try to follow up after the session. But thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.